The king believed he knew every secret his castle kept. He knew the whisper of a draft through the western parapet that sounded like a weeping woman, the precise flagstone in the great hall that had been hollowed out by centuries of passing feet, the way the moonlight fell through the oriel window in their chambers to cast a silver map across the ancient floorboards. He knew the scent of his mate's sleep, a warm, human fragrance of lavender and chamomile, and the faint, clean smell of her skin. But for 3 months, he had been living with a ghost, a secret that curled in the heart of his sanctuary, and he had not known. He found it while she bathed. The evening ritual was sacred to her, a time when she retreated to the adjoining bathing chamber for an hour of solitude in the great marble tub. Dmitri used these moments to attend to small tasks in their chambers, respecting her need for privacy. Tonight, he was returning a book to the shelf when his preternatural hearing caught it, the soft sound of paper sliding against wood from inside the bookcase. His enhanced senses, which could detect a heartbeat 3 floors away, had been muted by his trust, by his assumption that their private sanctuary held no secrets. But now, with Natasha safely behind the closed bathing chamber door, something in the bookcase had shifted, and his instincts awakened. He knelt and examined the lower shelf. Behind a row of histories, tucked deep in the shadows, was a small, unadorned rosewood box. It had moved, perhaps from the vibration of his footsteps, perhaps from fate itself. It was not his. Its scent was faint, but it carried the lingering trace of her hands, and beneath that, the acrid tang of fierce sweat, old and absorbed into the wood. Curiosity, an emotion he hadn't truly felt in centuries, stirred within him. It was a simple thing, beautifully made but plain. He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark blue velvet, was a stack of letters. They were tied with a simple black ribbon. The paper was heavy, expensive parchment, the kind favored by the nobility for official correspondence. But there was no seal, no signature. He lifted the top letter. The script was an elegant, sharp calligraphy, each letter a blade. And the words were poison. To the human creature who defiles the king's bed, it began. Dmitri went preternaturally still. The air in the room seemed to crystallize. He read on, his ageless eyes devouring the venom. The letter described, in methodical detail, what the writer intended to do to her. It spoke of blades and fire, of taking away everything she was, of screams that would echo in the halls as a lesson to all who would see a human corrupt their immortal king. It was not the ranting of a madman. It was a promise, rendered with the cold precision of a torturer's manual. From the bathing chamber, he heard the soft splash of water as she moved in the tub, humming quietly to herself. The sound was a physical blow. She was so fragile in her mortality, a fleeting, brilliant flame in his endless night. He had surrounded her with guards, with luxury, with the absolute power of his name, believing her safe, believing her protected. He looked back at the box. He untied the ribbon with hands that did not shake, though the control cost him. There were more, dozens more. He scanned the first lines of each, a litany of escalating violence and hatred. 6 days now since you defiled the throne with your presence. I saw you in the gardens today, your mortal flesh an insult to the very stones. 3 weeks you have been a cancer in our court, and the cure is coming. Months. This had been happening for months. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful. 2 weeks ago, he'd found her staring out the window at dawn, her expression distant. When he'd asked if she was well, she'd smiled and said she was simply tired. Last month, he'd noticed she'd begun checking the corridor before entering their chambers, a quick, furtive glance he'd attributed to natural caution. 3 months ago, she'd stopped walking in the gardens alone, claiming she preferred his company. He had been pleased. Fool. These were not the actions of a woman in love. They were the actions of a woman afraid. She had suffered this alone. She had read these words, these promises of agony, and she had looked at him and said nothing. The thought that she had felt unable to come to him, that she had borne this fear in silence, was an agony sharper than any blade described in the vile script. And then, beneath the devastation, the rage began to build. It was not the hot, fleeting anger of a man. It was an ancient, tectonic fury, a cold, dark star igniting in the vast emptiness of his being. Someone had dared. Someone living under his roof, breathing his air, had dared to threaten the single thing that gave his unending existence meaning. They had put their hands on what was his. He carefully, silently, placed the letters back in the box and closed the lid. The soft click echoed in the tomb-like silence of the room. He turned, his movements fluid and unnervingly quiet, and walked to the bathing chamber door. He pressed his palm against the heavy wood, feeling the warmth from within, hearing her heartbeat, steady and alive. The monster that had won him a throne, the creature of shadow and violence he kept leashed in the deepest parts of himself for her, was beginning to stir. The king had been content to be a man for her, but the man would not be enough to answer this. This required the king, and the monster that wore his crown. He stood there for a long time, a statue carved from night and fury, listening to her breathe, memorizing the sound of her safety. It was the last peace the castle would know for a very long time. Natasha emerged from her bath wrapped in a silk robe, her damp hair falling around her shoulders. She found him sitting on the edge of their bed, still as carved stone, the rosewood box resting on the covers before him. Her heart didn't just drop, it plummeted, a stone cast into a bottomless well. A cold dread, familiar and sickening, washed over her. For 3 months, she had managed to keep this poison separate from their life together. For 3 months, she had woken early, checked the small alcove near their chamber door where the letters appeared like clockwork every few days, left by an unseen hand in the pre-dawn hours when even the servants slept. She would pocket them, hide them in the box, and bury the fear deep enough that she could smile at breakfast. But now, the secret was out, sitting between them like a corpse. "Dmitri," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. The single word was an admission, a plea, a surrender. He moved toward her, his grace more predatory than she had ever seen it. He did not look angry. He looked hollowed out, as if some vital part of him had been carved away, leaving something cold and terrible in its place. Why? His voice was quiet, dangerously so. It was the voice he used on the battlefield, the voice that preceded an execution, a low, resonant tone that held no warmth, only absolute finality. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and shameful. "I didn't want you to see me as weak," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush of confession. "I didn't want to be a burden. They already whisper that a human is a liability, a vulnerability you can't afford. I wanted to be strong for you. I thought if I ignored them, they would stop." His expression didn't change, but a flicker of something, pain so profound it was almost physical, crossed his eyes. "You thought you had to carry this alone?" he asked, the question laced with a disbelief that cut her to the core. "You read these obscenities, and you lay beside me at night and pretended all was well?" "I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing they'd frightened me," she insisted, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "And I didn't want to unleash this." She gestured vaguely at the rigid set of his shoulders, the chilling stillness that had enveloped him. "I know what you are, Dmitri. I know what you do to your enemies. I didn't want to be the cause of that. I didn't want to be the reason the castle ran with blood." "The castle should have run with blood the moment the first of these arrived," he said, the words a low vibration that seemed to come from the very stones of the fortress. He reached out, not to the box, but to her. His fingers, cool and impossibly strong, brushed a strand of damp hair from her cheek. The gesture was so tender it was a brutal contradiction to the fury radiating from him. "Natasha, look at me." She met his gaze. His eyes, usually the color of warm, dark honey, were now black pits, ancient and fathomless. Your strength is not in question. It never has been. You have stood beside a creature of the night and called him your own. You walk among immortals who could kill you with a thought, and you do not flinch. Do you truly believe I would see this as weakness? He shook his head, a slow, deliberate movement. This is not weakness. This is my failure. I promised you safety. I promised you a world where you would never know fear again, and I have failed. No, she whispered, her hand coming up to cover his. You didn't fail. I hid it from you. That you felt you had to hide it is the failure, he corrected, his voice softening with a terrible, aching grief. That my world has made you feel that your pain is a political liability. That is my sin. He took a deep breath. Then he stood, the movement abrupt and final. He picked up the box. This ends now, he said. The words not a promise, but a statement of immutable fact. Whoever did this will answer for it. They will learn that what is mine is sacred. He started for the door. Dmitri, wait, she called out. A new fear, not for herself but for him, for what he was about to become, seizing her. What are you going to do? He paused at the threshold, turning to look at her one last time. The firelight from the hearth cast his face in sharp relief, and for the first time she saw the full, terrifying majesty of the 900-year-old monarch, the warrior who had carved an empire from the flesh of his enemies. The man she loved was gone, and in his place stood the king. I am going to remind my court, he said, his voice a sliver of ice, why they call me the Impaler's son. And I am going to teach them that what is mine is sacred. He turned and walked out, the heavy oak door closing behind him with a sound like a tomb being sealed. Natasha was left alone in the sudden, oppressive silence, the ghost of his fury still hanging in the air like the scent of ozone after a lightning strike. The moment the chamber door closed behind Dmitri, the atmosphere of the entire citadel shifted. It grew colder, heavier. The ancient magic that permeated the stones, usually a dormant, slumbering presence, awoke with a low, predatory hum. Servants pressing themselves flat against the corridor walls felt it as a prickling on their skin, a sudden, primal urge to flee. Guards standing at attention found their hands tightening on their pikes, their immortal hearts giving a sudden, jarring thud in their chests. The king was awake. Not the consort, not the ruler, but the conqueror. Dmitri moved through the halls like a storm front rolling in. His shadow seemed darker, his footsteps utterly silent on the stone. He did not go to the throne room or the council chamber. He descended, taking a winding stone staircase down into the belly of the castle, to the command center of his intelligence network. The Iron Rookery, they called it, for the black-clad, silent agents who served as his eyes and ears. He swept into the chamber without ceremony. Kalin, his spy master for the last 4 centuries, looked up from a coded dispatch. When he saw Dmitri's expression, a flicker of genuine alarm crossed his features. He rose too, his feet in a single fluid motion. My king, Kalin said, his voice a low whisper. Dmitri said nothing. He walked to the central table and placed the rosewood box upon it. The simple, elegant object seemed to suck all the light and warmth from the room. He opened the lid. You have served me since the fall of the Orlov dynasty, Dmitri stated, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. In all that time, have you ever known me to tolerate a threat to my throne? Never, my king, Kalin answered, his eyes fixed on the letters. This is not a threat to my throne, Dmitri continued, his voice dropping even lower. This is a threat to my life. My mate. For 3 months, this filth has been delivered to her chambers in the pre-dawn hours. In my castle, under my protection, under your watch." Kaelin's face paled. He stepped forward and, with infinite care, used a small pair of silver tongs to lift the top letter. He read the first few lines, his expression hardening to cold fury. "Unacceptable," he breathed. "A catastrophic failure on my part." "Indeed," Dmitri said. "You will rectify this failure. You will find who penned these. You will bring me their name. You will use every agent, every asset, every whisper in the darkest corners of this kingdom. Question the night watch. Examine every corridor near her chambers. Find who among the servants might have been bribed or coerced. You have until nightfall." Kaelin didn't flinch. "The letters are left in the small alcove near your chambers." "Yes, between the hours of 4 and 5 in the morning, before even the kitchen staff wake." "Then we know our enemy moves in that window. I will have answers, my king." Kaelin paused. "With your permission, I will also begin forensic analysis of the letters themselves." "Do it," Dmitri commanded. "And Kaelin, I want the agent you have embedded in House Valerius to search the Lord's private study. I have long suspected his disapproval runs deeper than political disagreement. If there is evidence, find it." "The study is kept locked, my king. My agent has never gained access." "Then tonight he breaks the lock. This is war." Dmitri swept out and went next to the armory. Rorik, the captain of his personal guard, slammed a gauntleted fist to his breastplate and knelt. "My king." "Captain," Dmitri acknowledged. "Seal the castle. No one enters, no one leaves. Post triple sentries on all of Natasha's known paths. The gardens, the library, her solar, and especially the corridor leading to our chambers. Station guards at the alcove where the letters have been appearing. The guards assigned to her directly are to be shadowed by a second, unseen team. If a breath of wind touches her without my permission, I will hold you personally responsible." "Understood, my king," Rorik said. "I will also assign rotating watches on that alcove. If another letter is delivered, we will catch the courier." "Good. Now, gather your 50 most trusted men, the Blood Guard. Have them ready in the Grand Hall by sunset. When Kaelin gives me a name, justice will be served. They will be honored to serve," Rorik said. The Blood Guard had not been officially mustered in over a century. With his orders given, Dmitri went to the highest balcony of the tallest spire. Dawn was breaking, light that would kill him if he stepped into its rays. He stood in the deep shadow of the archway, and he watched his kingdom. He let the cold, calculating fury fill him, sharpening his senses, honing his focus. He was no longer a husband, grieving and afraid. He was a predator, overlooking his hunting ground. He would burn his own kingdom to the ground to find the one who had dared to threaten his queen. The hunt had begun. As the sun climbed higher, Kaelin's network moved with lethal efficiency. Within 2 hours, 3 terrified servants were brought to the Iron Rookery for questioning. 2 were quickly cleared, but the third, a young kitchen boy named Peter, broke under Kaelin's interrogation. "I was paid," he sobbed, 10 gold crowns each time. I never looked at what was in the envelopes, I swear it. I was just told to leave them in the alcove before the morning bell." "Paid by whom?" Kaelin's voice was silk over steel. "I never saw his face. He wore a hooded cloak. We met in the lower wine cellars. He said if I spoke of it to anyone, my family would suffer." "When is your next meeting?" "Tonight, midnight. He said there would be one final letter." Kaelin dismissed the boy to a guarded cell and turned his attention to the letters themselves. He laid them out with clinical precision, analyzing each element. Meanwhile, his embedded agent moved through House Valerius's estate. The private study had always been forbidden territory, locked and guarded. But with the king's explicit permission, the agent picked the lock and slipped inside. In a locked drawer within the study, he found it. Lord Valerius's personal journal. The agent delivered the journal to Callan, who examined it with growing certainty. The evidence was absolute. Every detail pointed to one man. Callan immediately sent word to Dmitri. "The prey is identified, my king. The evidence is conclusive. It leads directly to the heart of your council, to House Valerius. Awaiting your command." The response came within minutes. "Summon a full court assembly. The Grand Hall. Sunset. Attendance is mandatory. The Blood Guard will be ready." Dmitri stood in his private study as the message arrived. He read it once, then walked to the window. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and blood. Lord Valerius, one of the oldest, most powerful nobles in his court, a man who sat on his advisory council, a man who had smiled to his face and toasted his happiness, all while composing these abominations in secret. The sheer arrogance was breathtaking. The question of guilt was answered. The only question that remained was the nature of the response. A quiet execution was too private. This offense had been an attack on the very foundation of his reign. The response had to be public. It had to be a lesson written in absolute terms, one that would echo through the ages. He sent for the Lord Chamberlain. "You will call a full and formal court assembly," Dmitri commanded, "in 1 hour, in the Grand Hall. Attendance is not optional." The Chamberlain bowed low. "Of course, my king. May I inquire as to the nature of the assembly?" "You may not," Dmitri said. "You will also send a formal summons to my consort. She is to be escorted to the hall and seated beside me on the dais. She is to wear the crown jewels and the crimson silks of a ruling queen." The Chamberlain's eyes widened slightly. To display her so prominently now was a statement. "As you command, my king." The sun bled below the horizon and the long night of reckoning began. In an hour, the trap would be set. Valerius would attend, of course. His arrogance would not allow him to show fear. He would walk into the Grand Hall and take his place among his peers, convinced of his own safety, shielded by his ancient name. Dmitri felt a cold smile touch his lips. They had all forgotten what it meant to rule. They had grown comfortable in the peace he had maintained for centuries. They saw the diplomat, the scholar on the throne. They had forgotten the warrior who had put him there. Tonight he would remind them. He would show them all that she was not his vulnerability. She was his strength, his heart, and the reason his justice would be absolute. The Grand Hall was a cavern of tension. Hundreds of vampires, the most powerful and ancient in the kingdom, stood assembled in their finest silks and velvets, their jewels glittering in the torchlight. They stood in silence, an unprecedented thing for a court that thrived on whispers and intrigue. The air was thick with unspoken questions, with collective dread. They could all feel it. The power radiating from the throne, a palpable pressure. On the raised dais sat Dmitri, a figure carved from obsidian and stillness. He was not in ceremonial robes, but in simple black, the attire of a warrior. At his side was Natasha. She looked every inch the queen. The crimson of her gown was a slash of defiant color in the somber hall, and the ancient diamonds and rubies at her throat glittered with cold fire. Her face was pale, but her expression was composed, her back straight. She was a rock in the storm of her husband's fury, and her presence at his side was a powerful, silent declaration. Dmitri's eyes swept over the assembled court. He saw them all, the loyal, the ambitious, the fearful. And he saw him. Lord Valerius, standing near the front, his expression a perfect mask of noble concern. He even had the audacity to meet Dmitri's gaze with respectful inquiry. The performance was flawless. Dmitri let the silence stretch, letting the tension build. He let them wonder. He let them fear. When he finally spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the hall, each word weighted with menace. "I have ruled this kingdom for 907 years, he began. "In that time, we have known war and we have known peace. We have known prosperity and we have known hardship. But through it all, we have been bound by one unbreakable principle: loyalty. Loyalty to the throne. Loyalty to the kingdom. Loyalty to the law. My law. He paused. It has come to my attention that there are those among you who have forgotten this. There are those who believe my law is negotiable, who believe my will can be challenged, who believe my patience is infinite. His gaze settled directly on Lord Valerius. There are those who mistake peace for weakness. A collective gasp passed through the assembly. Valerius's composure cracked. A flicker of panic flashed in his eyes before he could master it. He took a half-step forward. "My king, I do not understand. Has there been an offense against the throne? The guilty party should be brought forth to face your justice." "Oh, they have been brought forth," Dmitri said, a terrifyingly gentle smile touching his lips. "They stand before me now." He made a small gesture. From the shadows, 50 of Rorik's blood guards stepped forward. They were clad in black iron armor, their faces hidden behind featureless helms. They formed a silent, impassable ring around the assembled nobles, cutting off all hope of escape. "Lord Valerius," Dmitri said, his voice conversational yet chilling, "you pride yourself on your correspondence. Your letters are known throughout the courts for their elegance and precision. I have recently become an admirer of your work myself." From within his tunic, he produced a single sheet of parchment. Natasha recognized it, the first letter. He held it up. "This script," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "so distinctive, so arrogant. The paper bears the watermark of House Valerius, a crowned serpent. The ink is a custom blend, scented with sandalwood, a vanity you are known for throughout the kingdom. And the calligraphy." He gestured, and Kalen stepped from the shadows beside the throne, holding Valerius's personal journal. "The calligraphy has been confirmed by my spy master to match your hand exactly. Your personal journal, retrieved from your locked study, contains the drafts of these letters. Practice runs of your venom. Scratched-out phrases, reworded cruelties. You savored your work, Lord Valerius. You honed it like a craftsman perfecting his art." He paused, letting the weight of the evidence settle over the hall. "A kitchen boy, now in my custody, has confessed to delivering these letters to my mate's chambers every few days for 3 months. He was paid 10 gold crowns per delivery by a hooded figure in the lower wine cellars. That figure has been identified. The evidence is irrefutable. There is no forgery here, Valerius. There is only your guilt, laid bare before your peers." Valerius's face went ashen. The mask of nobility shattered. "A forgery!" he spat, his voice shrill with desperation. "My study was violated. This is a vile trick by my enemies." "A loyal servant?" Dmitri mused. "Then perhaps you will explain the distinctive flourishes in your calligraphy that appear in both your official correspondence and these obscenities. Perhaps you will explain why your custom sandalwood ink, a blend you commission from a single artisan in the southern provinces, appears on letters threatening to carve my queen like a piece of meat." The court stared, horrified. There was no escape, no denial possible. He was exposed, his treason laid bare. In his desperation, Valerius drew the ceremonial sword at his hip. "For the purity of the bloodline," he screamed, "for the true kingdom!" But he did not lunge for the throne. Instead, he grabbed the nearest noble, Lady Morian, an elderly vampiress, and held the blade to her throat. "Let me leave this hall unharmed, or I will kill her," he shouted. "I will spill noble blood on your floor." The hall erupted in gasps. Lady Morian's eyes were wide with terror. Dmitri stood slowly from his throne, his movements deliberate. His expression did not change. "You threaten one of my nobles," Dmitri said, his voice cutting through the chaos. You hold her life hostage to save your own worthless existence. And you believe this will earn you mercy? You have shown your hand, Valerius. You are not a patriot. You are a coward who writes threats in the dark and hides behind the innocent when caught. Dmitri moved. One moment he was on the dais, the next he was before Valerius. The motion was too fast for mortal eyes to follow. His hand shot out, and the sword clattered to the flagstones. With his other hand, Dmitri pulled Lady Morian away, gently guiding her to safety. "You are safe, my lady," he said softly. Then he turned back to Valerius. What happened next was swift and absolute. The court did not see the details, only the result. Valerius fell to his knees, utterly broken, his defiance shattered. Dmitri stood over him, his presence overwhelming. "This is the fate of those who threaten what is mine," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "This is the fate of those who mistake my love for weakness. House Valerius is no more. Their lands are forfeit. Their name is struck from the records. Their bloodline ends this night." He looked down at the defeated lord. "You will be taken to the deepest cell in the dungeons. You will be kept there for the remainder of your immortal existence. You will live in darkness, alone, with nothing but the memory of your failure and your cowardice for company. And every soul in this kingdom will know what happens to those who dare threaten my queen." He turned his back and walked to the dais. He did not look at the horrified faces of his court. He looked only at Natasha. He sat beside her, the monster retreating, the man returning. He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle despite the violence that had just transpired. The message was delivered, and in the dead silence of the grand hall, a new legend was born. Of a terrifying protector whose love was the most dangerous shield the world had ever known. Natasha looked at the stunned court, then at the man beside her. And for the first time in months, she felt completely, utterly safe. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. The assembled court stood frozen, their composure shattered. They had witnessed not merely justice, but an unmaking. Rorik and the Bloodguard moved with grim efficiency, removing the broken lord from the hall. No one moved. No one spoke. They simply watched, their eyes wide with fresh understanding of their sovereign. The message was clear. The queen was untouchable, and the king they thought they knew was merely one facet of a far more dangerous truth. Dmitri ignored them all. His world had shrunk to the woman beside him. He kept his grip on Natasha's hand, his thumb stroking the back of it, a gesture that was a universe away from the judgment he had just delivered. He was watching her face, searching for fear, for revulsion. He had done what was necessary for her, but he feared what she might now see when she looked at him. Natasha did not pull away. She did not flinch. She simply sat there, processing what had transpired. Then, slowly, she turned and met his eyes. There was no horror in her expression. There was awe, and a deep understanding that stole his breath. She saw it all, the king, the protector, the man, and she was not afraid. Her fingers tightened around his, a silent affirmation. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. "The assembly is concluded," he said to the silent hall. He did not need to shout. His actions had spoken with more finality than any words could. He led Natasha from the dais, and the sea of nobles parted before them. They walked the length of the grand hall, their footsteps echoing in the vast silence, and returned to the sanctuary of their chambers. The moment the door closed, cutting off the rest of the world, the weight of the night descended upon him. He released her hand and walked to the fireplace, resting his hands on the mantelpiece. He stared into the embers. "I am sorry you had to see that," he said, his voice low and strained. He felt ancient and weary. Natasha came to stand behind him. She didn't speak. She simply placed her hands on his back, her touch a point of warmth. He had expected her to be shaken, to need comfort. Instead, she was comforting him. "For months," she said softly, her voice steady. "I read those letters and I felt a cold, creeping fear, a fear that I was alone. A fear that this world you brought me into would eventually consume me, that its hatred for what I am would win." She paused. "Tonight, in that hall, I was not afraid. I watched you, and I understood." He turned to face her, his expression etched with vulnerability. "And what did you understand?" he asked, his voice raw. "I understood that love, for someone like you, isn't just about tenderness or affection. It's about this." She gestured, encompassing the night's events. "It's a fortress. It's a promise of absolute safety. I spent so long trying to protect you from your own power because I was afraid of it. But I was wrong. That power isn't a threat to us. It's the wall that keeps the rest of the world at bay." She reached up and touched his face. "I saw the truth of you tonight, Dmitri. All of it. And I am not afraid." The words were a balm on his soul. The fear that his nature was too dark for her light began to heal. He had not broken them. He had forged them into something stronger. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the lavender and chamomile scent of her, the scent of home, of life. He held her with desperate tenderness. "I would burn the world to ash for you," he whispered against her skin, the words a vow, a confession, a prayer. "I know," she murmured back, her arms wrapped tightly around him, holding him together. "But you don't have to. You just have to stand with me." They stood there for a long time as the castle outside began to slowly return to life. The whispers would begin now. The story of the king's judgment would spread through the kingdom and out into the wider world. But here, in the quiet of their rooms, there was no legend. There was only a man and a woman, bound not just by love, but by profound understanding. Outside, the night was dark and full of new fears for his court. But inside, for the first time in a long time, there was only peace.